My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 22 years old. And 3 days ago, my family sat in a lawyer's office and celebrated because they thought Grandpa had left me nothing. Not the company, not the lake house, not even his watch. My older brother Ethan actually laughed and said, "Guess Grandpa finally realized who the disappointment was." My mom smiled at him. My dad looked relieved. And then, the attorney opened a second folder. One my family didn't know existed. That's when Ethan stopped smiling. That's when my father turned white. And that's when everyone in the room learned Grandpa had secretly transferred the entire company to me 2 years earlier. Not shares. Control. Majority ownership, voting rights, everything. But before I tell you how my family tried to steal a company they never legally owned, hit like and subscribe. And tell me where you're watching from. I read the comments late at night when I can't sleep. Now let me take you back 6 years, to a rainy October afternoon in northern Michigan, the day Grandpa first realized exactly who his children were becoming. I was 16 the first time Grandpa took me into the company warehouse. Bennett Outdoor Supply sat on the edge of town beside the river, old brick building, faded green sign, forklifts humming inside. The place smelled like cedar wood, machine oil, and coffee that had been sitting too long on a burner. Grandpa loved that smell. "Smells like people working," he used to say. He walked slowly back, then one hand always resting against his lower back, but his mind, sharp as glass. "Come here, Claire." He waved me toward a shelf stacked with camping lanterns. "What do you see?" he asked. I shrugged. "Inventory?" He laughed softly. "No. I see payroll. Mortgages. College tuition. Families." I didn't fully understand what he meant at the time. I would later. That whole afternoon, Grandpa showed me everything. How shipments were tracked, how purchase orders worked, why vendors trusted certain buyers and not others. He explained business like he was teaching someone how to care for a living thing. Not a company. A responsibility. Meanwhile, my father hated being there. Dad only came into the office when he needed money. And Ethan treated the company like an inheritance waiting to happen. Not something built, something owed. I remember one dinner that winter especially clearly. The kind of memory that doesn't feel important until years later. Mom had made pot roast. Ethan was talking about buying a new truck even though he'd already maxed out 2 credit cards. Dad laughed and said, "Well, one day this whole company will be yours anyway." Grandpa stopped eating. Just stopped. Fork halfway to his mouth. Then he looked at Ethan and asked quietly, "And what exactly have you done to earn it?" The room went silent. Ethan smirked. "I'm your grandson." Grandpa set his fork down carefully. That's not an answer. I still think about the look on Ethan's face after that. Not embarrassment. Resentment. That was the first time I realized something dangerous lived underneath my family's smiles. And it only got worse after Grandma died. Everything changed after her funeral. Before that, Grandpa had been softer, somehow warmer. But after we buried her, he started paying attention differently. Watching people. Listening. Especially at family dinners. Especially when money came up. And money always came up. Dad's construction business was failing. Ethan had gambling debts nobody talked about openly. Mom kept pretending everything was just temporary. But temporary stretched into years. One night I walked into the kitchen around midnight and heard my parents talking. Dad was whispering harshly, "If he'd just sign over partial ownership now, we could refinance everything." Mom sighed. "Harold doesn't trust Ethan." "He doesn't have to trust Ethan. He just has to die eventually." I froze in the hallway. My own father said that. About Grandpa. I remember gripping the wall so hard my fingers hurt. And the worst part? I don't think he even meant it cruelly. Just practically. Like Grandpa had become a financial delay instead of a person. The next morning, Grandpa picked me up before school. We drove along the river in silence for a while. Then suddenly he asked, "Claire, if people only love what you can give them, what happens when there's nothing left to give?" I stared out the window. "I don't know." He nodded slowly. "You learn who actually sees you." At the time, I thought he was talking about grief. I was wrong. 2 years later, Grandpa's health started getting worse. Hospital visits, medication changes, long afternoons asleep in his chair beside the fireplace. And suddenly my family became very attentive. Dad started visiting every weekend, Mom brought soup, Ethan offered to help with business meetings. But I noticed something. Nobody stayed after paperwork was finished. Nobody sat with Grandpa when he couldn't sleep. Nobody listened to his stories twice. Except me. One snowy evening, I found him alone in the office after closing. The warehouse lights were off except for one hanging lamp over his desk. Snow tapped softly against the windows. Grandpa looked tired. Older than I'd ever seen him. "Claire," he said quietly, "come sit down." I sat across from him. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were company ownership charts, trust documents, share distributions. I blinked. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because someday people are going to tell you family and business should never mix." He leaned back slowly. "But the truth is, character decides everything." I looked at the papers again. Then at him. "Grandpa." He smiled sadly. "I built this company from a garage and a borrowed truck. Your father sees money. Ethan sees status. But you." His voice softened. "You ask how the warehouse guys are doing." I didn't know what to say. So I just sat there. And I would realize later, that conversation changed my entire life. 3 months after that, Grandpa died. The funeral was packed. Employees came from 3 states away, truck drivers, warehouse workers, store managers. People cried harder than my own family did. And after the service, Ethan actually stood near the coffee table talking about future expansion opportunities. At Grandpa's funeral. I should have seen it sooner. The reading of the will happened 4 days later. Downtown law office, grey carpet, cold leather chairs. Rain streaked the windows outside. The attorney, Mr. Holloway, adjusted his glasses and began reading. The lake house went to Dad. Grandma's jewelry went to Mom. Investment accounts were divided between Ethan and my parents. And me. Nothing. Not one thing. Ethan laughed under his breath immediately. Dad avoided looking at me. Mom actually whispered, "Well, that settles that." I sat completely still. Because honestly, it hurt. More than I expected. Not because I wanted money. Because Grandpa had been my person. And suddenly it felt like maybe I hadn't known him at all. Then Ethan leaned toward me smiling. Guess Grandpa finally knew who could handle responsibility. That almost broke me. But then, Mr. Holloway cleared his throat. "There is one final matter." The room changed instantly. You could feel it. He reached beneath the table and removed a second folder. Dark blue thick. My father frowned. "What's that?" Mr. Holloway looked directly at me. "Claire Bennett, 2 years ago your grandfather established the Bennett Holdings Irrevocable Trust." Silence. Complete silence. My heartbeat sounded loud in my ears. The trust contains 51% controlling ownership of Bennett Outdoor Supply. Dad blinked. "What?" Mr. Holloway continued calmly. "Mrs. Claire Bennett was designated successor controlling beneficiary effective immediately upon Harold Bennett's death." Ethan laughed nervously. No, that's not possible." Mr. Holloway slid documents across the table. Signed, witnessed, filed. Legal. Dad's face lost color so fast it scared me. "You gave the company to her?" Ethan snapped. Mr. Holloway adjusted his glasses again. "Your grandfather transferred ownership 2 years ago." 2 years. That meant while my family thought they were waiting to inherit the company, Grandpa had already protected it. Protected me. And then came the part I'll never forget. Mr. Holloway handed me a sealed envelope. "Your grandfather asked that you read this privately." My hands shook opening it. Inside was a single handwritten letter. "Claire, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I know this decision will hurt people, especially your father. But leadership is not reward. It is responsibility. And responsibility should only belong to someone who protects what matters instead of exploiting it. You were the only person who stayed after conversations ended, the only one who spoke to employees by name, the only one who treated this company like people instead of profit. Your family may mistake this for favoritism. It isn't. It's trust. And trust is earned quietly. Take care of the company, take care of yourself. And Claire, never confuse guilt with love. I had to stop reading after that. Because I couldn't see through the tears anymore. Have you ever had someone believe in you before you believed in yourself? I still think about that moment. But that wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the worst month of my life. Because the second we walked out of that office, my family changed. Dad cornered me in the parking garage. His voice low and shaking. You're not seriously keeping this from us. I stared at him. Keeping what? The company. Ethan stepped forward. You don't know how to run a business, Claire. I've worked there since I was 16. You stocked shelves, he snapped. Dad rubbed his face hard. You need to transfer controlling shares to the family until things stabilize. The family. Funny how that word suddenly appeared when money did. I looked at them standing there under those cold garage lights. And something inside me finally became very clear. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as access. The next few weeks became war. Phone calls, pressure, manipulation. Mom cried constantly. Dad talked about debt, about losing the house, about what Grandpa would have wanted. Ethan got meaner every day. One night he showed up drunk outside my apartment yelling that I stole his future. His future. Like Grandpa's entire life had existed waiting for Ethan to inherit it. Then came the shareholder meeting. And that's where everything exploded publicly. See. Ethan thought he still had influence because Dad owned minority shares. So he organized a meeting with department heads and investors without telling me. I only found out because Sandra, Grandpa's old assistant, called me quietly the night before. Claire. I think you need to be there tomorrow. What's happening? Long pause. Your brother is telling people he's taking operational control. I barely slept that night. The next morning I walked into headquarters wearing Grandpa's old watch for the first time. The conference room was packed. Executives, managers, investors. Ethan stood near the projector talking confidently. Then he saw me. And smiled. That smile still makes my stomach turn. There she is, he said loudly. Perfect timing. Everyone looked at me. Dad stood near the back avoiding eye contact. Ethan clasped his hands dramatically. As everyone knows, Claire inherited temporary controlling interest under unusual emotional circumstances. Temporary. Emotional. He kept talking like I wasn't even in the room. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. But obviously real leadership requires experience. That's when Sandra stood up quietly from the far end of the table. And slid a folder toward the investors. I think everyone should read page 3 first. Ethan frowned. One investor opened the folder, then another. The room slowly went silent. Because page 3 contained Grandpa's succession letter to the board. A letter none of them had seen before. In it, Grandpa wrote, "If anyone attempts to pressure, manipulate, or remove Claire Bennett from operational control after my death, consider that person unfit for leadership within this company. I authorize Claire Bennett as permanent acting CEO and majority controlling owner effective immediately." The silence after that felt enormous. Ethan looked like someone punched him. Dad sat down slowly in a chair without saying a word. And then one of the investors asked quietly, "Claire, would you like to address the room?" My hands were shaking. But I stood anyway. And for the first time in my life, my family couldn't interrupt me. "I never wanted to fight anyone," I said quietly. "I just wanted to protect what Grandpa built." Nobody moved. I think some people confuse ownership with entitlement. But my grandfather taught me leadership is service. I looked at Ethan then. Directly at him. And service starts with respect. Ethan walked out 5 minutes later. Dad followed him. Neither looked back. The room stayed silent for a long time after the door closed. Then Sandra smiled at me softly and said, "Your grandfather would have been proud of that." I almost cried right there. 6 months later, things are quieter now. Dad and I talk sometimes carefully, like people rebuilding a bridge one plank at a time. Ethan moved to Arizona after his gambling debts got worse. We haven't spoken in almost a year. And the company? It's doing better than it has in decades. Not because of me alone. Because Grandpa built something worth protecting. I still go into the warehouse some mornings before everyone arrives. The building smells the same: cedar wood, machine oil, burnt coffee. Sometimes I stand beside Grandpa's old office window and watch the trucks pull out at sunrise. And I think about something he told me once. Character shows up long before opportunity does. I didn't understand that when I was 16. I do now. If you're listening to this while feeling overlooked, underestimated, forgotten, hear me carefully. The people who truly matter will see your character long before the world sees your success. And sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money. It's being trusted with something meaningful. That's my story. And honestly, I think Grandpa knew exactly what he was doing the whole time.